We are here this morning with Warren Buffett, the chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. And Warren, we want to thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we're just coming out of this story about Las Vegas, and while unfortunately it seems that we as a nation are becoming more and more inured to hearing about shooting stories, this one is different in the scale, in the scope of it, in the stories that are coming out right now. Do you have any reaction to what you've heard?
You never should get inured to this. The one thing I would say is that I heard that the shooter got off 200 rounds in 90 seconds or something like that. And I think the Las Vegas Metro Police did an incredible job in getting there. I mean, when somebody's shooting at that rate, the police force may have saved maybe even hundreds of lives by reacting as fast as they did. But you've got 325 million people in this country, and a certain percentage of them, their brains don't work like brains should.
And you see a situation like this develop. Obviously, our hearts and our thoughts are with the people of Las Vegas and the people who have traveled around to be there today. But we are talking about business, too. And as much as we should not become inured to this, if you look at the markets, it's hard to see much of a reaction. The markets have ignored just about any potential bad news lately, with the Dow setting another record yesterday and with 8 quarters in a row now of gains for the markets. Is that a market that makes sense to you? Do valuations here make sense?
Well, the valuations make sense with interest rates where they are. I mean, in the end, you measure laying out money for an asset in relation to what you're going to get back, and the number one yardstick is U.S. governments. And when you get 230 on the 10-year. I think stocks will do considerably better than that. So if I have a choice of the two, I'm going to take stocks at that point. On the other hand, if interest rates were on the 10-year were 5 or 6, you'd have a whole different valuation standards for stocks. And we've talked about that, for some time now.
I was going to say, it's been years that you've been talking about how this is in relation to gravity and pulling the markets down, and how it's not happening here.
Yeah, interest rates are gravity. If we knew interest rates were going to be zero from now till Judgment Day, you could pay a lot of money for any other asset. You would not want to put your money out at zero. And I would have thought back in 2009 that rates would not be this low 8 years later. But it's been a powerful factor, and the longer it persists, the more people start thinking in terms of something close to the rates they've seen for a long time. So the one thing I'm sure of is that over time, stocks from this level will beat bonds from this level. If I could be short the 30-year bond at 3% or something and long the S&P 500 and just have it put away for 30 years, stocks are going to far outperform bonds. And the question is, which variable is going to change? And everybody expects interest rates to change, but they've been expecting it quite a while.
So does that mean, if the one factor is interest rates, we know that the Fed is looking at raising rates. It's going to do so slowly and gradually over time. At least that's what they've been telegraphing to this point. Would you bet on that continuing for the next couple of years? I mean, 2.3% to 5% is a long way when you're moving when you're moving in quarter-point increments.
Yeah, that'd be a long way, and I would guess. I don't try and guess the stock market. I just buy businesses I like. But if I were to guess, if interest rates, if the 10-year moved up to 5%, I think stocks would be somewhat cheaper.
But you're not betting. You're not betting that that's going to happen in the next couple of years.
No, and over time I'm going to own stocks. I mean, it's been so wide. I've written about it in the annual reports. I mean, stocks have been so much more attractive than bonds for a long time now, and that's partly intentional on the part of the Fed. I mean, they wanted assets to increase in value, and the way to do it was to reduce that gravity force of higher interest rates.
The Fed has been sounding a little more hawkish. Even Janet Yellen has been sounding a little more hawkish. Does that concern you, or are people getting complacent, thinking rates are going to be low for an extended period of time here?
Well, I think they expect them to increase, but the question is how much. I mean, if 3 years from now interest rates are 100 basis points higher than this, stocks will still look cheap at these prices. If they're 300 or 400 basis points, they won't look cheap. And Janet Yellen doesn't know what she would do 3 years from now. I mean, she's got more of a job than that's simple factor of the stock market. It's really interesting because the Fed has said that they'd like to see 2% inflation. I mean, that's
Sure.
fairly recent. That would Paul Volcker would not have slept if he'd ever heard that in the 80s. But if the U.S. government is borrowing at 10 years from you at 2.3%, and their own instrument, the Fed, is saying we would really like money to become worth 2% a year less, they're not promising you very much in terms of real terms for saving.
Right. So Janet Yellen, you said she's got a big job. The question is, does she keep that job, or does President Trump appoint someone else? And it seems like two of the leading figures right now are either Kevin Warsh or Jerome Powell. As an investor, do you have to spend some time thinking about who's running the Fed to think about what stock prices are going to do if interest rates are the most important factor?
Yeah, I don't spend time thinking about it, but it wouldn't do me any good to think about it. I wouldn't know the answer in the end. And most of the time, the Fed is not that important. Occasionally, it's everything.
They've been awfully important the last 8 or 9, 10 years.
It can be the only game in town. Right. There was only one person that, in September of 2008, could walk out like the sheriff into the street and say, that this isn't going any further. We're going to do whatever is necessary and have the power to do it. I mean, the Fed is of enormous importance during a panic, and people tend to hang on their every word in between. We don't pay any attention to it.
But you have said that interest rates are the most important factor, so anybody who's trying to play the market and figure things out, maybe not as long of a term investor as you're going to be with these things, should be thinking about this.
Well, but if they really think they can figure it out, they might as well play the bond market. I mean, they don't really have to get over to the stock market. So, but I can't remember a decision we've ever made based on the Fed, except for the fact that I felt that Bernanke and Paulson and Geithner, but I felt the Fed would do the right thing in the fall of 2008. We had an incredible economic machine that was in the hospital, and the Fed could bring it out.
I realize that interest rates are not something that you often think about, other than on a very broad scale. You've also said that taxes aren't something that you think about, other than on a very broad scale. Is that the case this time around?
Well, I think about them plenty right now because we may or may not have a change in the tax code. And we have lots of stocks with lots of gains, and we have a few stocks with losses. And here we are in October. And if something happens that changes the tax rate significantly on January 1st, it would pay me, assuming that they would reduce rates on capital gains or corporate rates, it would pay me to sell the losses now and defer the gains until next year. And I think there's a lot of that going on because I think there's an expectation that if they reduce, that if they have a tax act, they will cut the rates, certainly corporate rates. And it'd be kind of foolish to have a gain now and pay 35% tax on it if by waiting a few months you were likely to pay 25%. So it actually very seldom enters into our thinking. On balance, we'd rather sell things with losses than gains. But right now, we're sitting and watching because within 3 months, actually less than that, we'll know the answer on this as to whether this was the year to take losses and not gains. And we've got actions on both sides that we would take. I think.
So you're actually stopping what you're doing as at Berkshire. This is not just your personal account. At Berkshire, you are actually holding off potential losses, potential sales, or potential
realizing
purchases,
losses,
and realizing losses. So that's an actual change in your behavior that I've never heard you say anything.
It doesn't
like that
happen
before.
very often. That because you're in the month of October with a major tax act being a real possibility. Who knows whether it's a 20% chance, 50% chance. But one thing I know about it, I'll know the answer within a month or two. I mean, there's not that many days left to legislate. And I would feel kind of silly if I realized $1 billion worth of gains and paid $350 million of tax on it. If I just waited a few months, it would have paid $250. Now, if enough people are doing that, that may mean that the market's being affected fairly substantially.
Right. That's what is the broader play in the markets as a result? Because if you're doing it, you've got to imagine lots of people are doing it.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
You're talking about billions of dollars of potential sales.
Well, maybe hundreds of billions or something. I mean,
yeah, probably billions for you alone.
And you may be talking about people that it would tend to depress stocks that have behaved badly because people would be taking the losses now, and it would tend to defer gains and reduce the sellers currently there would be in stocks with very large appreciation.
So
I can tell you it's an actual factor at Berkshire, and it's very, very, very seldom in my 87 years that it's ever been a factor.
So what might we see if? But first of all, what do you think the odds of a tax plan getting passed are? You
Well,
must be putting
I
statistics on that.
personally think they're higher probably than most people think, because I think that having had the health care bill go the way it has, and just generally, and no infrastructure, if you take maybe the three big items, this is the only one left to do this year, and I would think the Republicans controlling both houses and the presidency, they would not want to have a shutout in their first year, and of top priorities. And I think they can get it done. I mean, it's not a tax reform act; it's a tax cut act. Mm-hmm. And I think that any politician that can't pass a tax cut probably is in the wrong line of business. I mean, if you can't pass that, I mean, it's a different thing with the Health Care Act, but I think there could be a lot of compromise, and I think it could be bipartisan to a degree.
Okay, I know Joe has a question.